I'll stop then. Okay, welcome to my talk on an introduction to mathematical crystallography. So we're going to go through what is crystallography, and then this is a maths undergraduate colloquium, so we're going to talk about the mathematical definitions of a crystal, compare crystals, so see which ones are the same, which are different, how much different, and why using continuous metrics and invariance is so important, not just in crystallography, but any sort of field, math-related field, where you're using real data. Okay, first of all, what is crystallography? It is the study of any solid crystalline structure. So, where a crystal is a periodic arrangement of atoms. These are solids like diamond, table salt, they're solid, and silicon crystals. These are quite useful in industry, as you might be aware. And one of the big goals, the dream for a crystallographer, is to find a new material that would revolutionize the world. So things like semiconductors, things like catalysts for hydrogen fuel. So everyone wants to find a new material, and AI included. So they've been using AI to generate a lot of simulated crystals. But it's really important to analyze these crystals and see what they've actually generated. Okay, AI can make crystals. Let's us will make crystals first. Unfortunately, we don't have a budget yet, so I couldn't buy you all crystal growing kits. We're going to construct a crystal slightly differently using the power of maths. You might be aware of this diagram on the left of a crystal. This is a classic cubic crystal. Things like salt have this structure, and usually when we draw them in textbook and stuff, you will see them with bonds. But we are going to look at it mathematically, so just at the geometry of it. So it's enough to just look at the position of the atoms. And these atoms, it's a periodic crystal. So these atoms repeat infinitely in your space. It's hard to define something infinite, so we're going to look at something small that we're going to repeat infinitely. And to do that, we're going to use a unit cell. So any unordered basis, Rn, defines a unit cell, which is the parallel of pipehead, consisting of all linear combinations with real coefficients 0 to 1. So what that means is that this is a 2D example. We're going to try and construct this square 2D crystal. I'm taking two basis vectors, v1 and v2, and my unit cell, I'm going to define a unit cell as all the points within this box. I can take this as a unit and we can repeat it infinitely. We'll repeat it infinitely and cover the whole plane, working in 2 dimensions for this example, because it's easier to draw the diagram. That was just the box. We need the atoms. So we let M be a finite set of points. This finite set of points are these atoms. So that live inside our unit cell. We're going to call that a motif. So this finite set of points that lives inside our unit cell, we call a motif. The basis also generates a lattice. So lattice is linear combinations of our basis vectors, but with integer coefficients. So it's only these points. So there's nothing in between, just these points. And why is a lattice useful? That's because we can use it to generate a periodic point set. What we're doing is we're taking one atom in our motif, so one vector in M, our motif, and we're going to generate all the other atoms in our infinite plane using this lattice. Okay, that was a square crystal. So as you can see, we constructed the square crystal that I showed you at the start, where you've got lots and lots of points in this sort of square pattern, and that would pretend it covers the entire plane. I have only a finite screen to show you this on. We don't have to have a square crystal. We could have different unit cells. They're all parallelograms because we want them to cover the entire plane. But what do these crystals look like? So let me draw them out for you. So here, this is the lattice. We've taken our basis vectors and we've covered the plane with integer multiples of them. And now I've added in the unit cells and the points. You might notice something interesting about this. Let me show you another one. Here's a different unit cell. Generates this lattice and this crystal. What do you notice about the points in this crystal and the points in the other crystals? Let me put them side by side. You've got different unit cells on the left, different motifs, they're in different positions within our unit cell. But we get the same periodic set out of it. You can see these are all square, I'm calling them square crystals. They're the same crystal. Okay. Look, maybe that was a coincidence because they were nice and square. Here are a few examples where they're not square. I picked deliberately quite different unit cells. I tried to even split these apart to see what you'd get. When you cover the whole plane, you can just see visually, these look like they're going to be the same crystal because you can see the same diagonal, so the same pattern. So we can sort of see that they're the same, but mathematically, how are we going to say that they're the same? Well, we're going to use an equivalence relation. We've seen this in foundations, if you do foundations, and that is the binary relation between two objects of any kind, and they have three axioms have to hold, which are flexibility, symmetry, and transitivity. But which equivalence relation are we going to use? We were talking about crystals in space. If I take a crystal, I move it around, I rotate it, it's not going to change. It's the same crystal. So we're going to use, so rigid motion is a composition of translations and rotations. The distances between the atoms won't change, so the crystal chemically stays the same. A slightly weaker equivalence relation would be isometry, which is basically rigid motion, but it also includes reflections. So you can reflect your set of points, an infinite set of points. I'll leave it as an exercise to the reader to decide, to convince yourself that these are equivalence relations. Okay. Probably the most important definition here is a periodic structure. So a periodic structure is an equivalence class of periodic point sets. So these are the set of all atoms under rigid motion. So that means if I have this infinite set of points and I translate it, it's the same crystals. They live in the same equivalence class, therefore that's a periodic structure. I could rotate it as well, and it is also in the same equivalence class. So these are all the same crystal. I mean, that makes sense. That's probably obvious. If I take a crystal and move it around, it's the same crystal. Okay. But how do we tell if we've got some points? How are we going to tell if they are in the same equivalence class? Well, we're going to use invariance. So invariant is a function I on a periodic point set is an isometry invariant if you have, they're related under our equivalence relation, which in our case we're going to pick isometry. If they're equivalent by isometry, then you want the values of the function to be the same. Yes. For example, here, we want these to be the same. These are equivalent under isometry, so we set up an equivalence relation. And so we would expect our invariant for this to be the same as our invariant for this. However, there isn't a condition here. This could also be the same, because a complete invariant is if the converse holds. So if I take a function, say f of x is 0, so the value of the function is always 0. That is an invariant. It's not a very useful invariant, because this would be 0, this would be 0, so this condition holds. But this is also 0, so it doesn't help us identify which crystals are the same. So that's why we use a complete invariant. in order to identify which crystals are different. So if they're not related by isometry, then we want the function to be different, the value of the function. Okay, so in crystallography, what does actually, how do they actually store these crystals? They don't, storing an infinite class is difficult, so they store files of the unit cell. In these files, they store the unit cell as lengths. So length A, usually it's ABC because it's in 3 space, but here I've just put 2 lengths, A and B, and an angle between, basically the angle between the 2 vectors. And below here, these are fractional coordinates. So let me explain. 0.5, 0.5, it's in the middle. So these are fractional because they're in terms of these lengths. You really shouldn't call them fractional, but that's how they do it. Okay, so if you remember, these unit cells with these motifs, they give the same crystal, the same square crystal. But I'm going to have completely different files. So if I just open up the files, you're not going to be able to tell if they're the same crystal or not. Well, crystallographers say, fine, that's okay, there's lots of unit cells, let's just pick one. Let's pick the simplest one, let's pick this one. This one's nice. This one's nice because it's primitive. It's minimal by volume. So we don't want to pick this one because this one could be reduced to this one. And then we like this right angle. So they use a complicated function called Niggle's form and they reduce it to try and get right angles. However, this isn't good enough because I'll show you why. Okay. Using discrete unit cells is not enough. Take your simple one, the one that they want to choose. Say I extend it, I add another one, and then I shift one of the atoms by a tiny amount. Now I have this one. This is now minimal by volume. I can't split it up any further and get the same repeating pattern. It is also, you've still got right angles. So now this one, you'd be choosing this one after a tiny little shift. So after this is what the crystals would sort of look like. They're pretty similar. This one's just shifted slightly. Why is this a problem? Well, because in crystallography, you're measuring things using X-ray diffraction. So often you're going to have experimental noise, or even, well, atoms just vibrate in solids. So you're going to have tiny bits of noise here. And using just unit cells, you're going to get completely different unit cells for the same crystal. Basically the same. Then we're going to call these near duplicates. Okay. In the past, they've used discrete invariants. So they've classified all crystals into 230 space groups. Quite a while back, actually, or over a century ago. These are discrete invariants because they're different categories. They're usually to do with symmetry. So here's a 2D example. There are 17 of these. Don't ask me why, there is a proof. But here are some examples. You can see that if you shift something in it, you're not going to preserve the symmetry. A tiny shift beforehand, and I shifted the atom, I no longer have this square crystal. The symmetry became different after a tiny shift. Okay. Why does that really affect us? Well, I'm going to introduce Genome, or no, however you want to say it. It is an AI tool developed by Google. You might have heard of AlphaFold, that's for protein folding, you're predicting proteins. They also created Genome, which is for predicting crystals. They reported the discovery of 2.2 million new crystals, equivalent to nearly 800 years worth of knowledge. Okay, I'm not sure how they came up with nearly 800 years of knowledge. Like, how do you even calculate that? I don't know. But the question is, are any of these crystals even real? I've got an interesting example here. Here are some known crystals. Which ones? This one is a known crystal. This one is a simulated crystal, and that is Genomes for the AI simulation. When you look at the geometry, these crystals are perturbations of each other up to a tiny amount. So 0.0001 angstroms. An angstrom is about the width of a hydrogen atom. So it's tiny. But if you look at the colours, they've all got different elements. They've got the same geometry up to a tiny amount, but completely different chemical compositions. See, that doesn't make much sense, because if you have a crystal or a material, you swap out some elements, the bonding is going to change. You're going to expect the distances to change. So this is sort of a little fishy. We realize at this point that I don't know what the AI has created. I'm not quite sure. So we need to dig further and see what have they actually done. They tried to check their own results. So at Berkeley A Lab, it's an autonomous laboratory. We've got the robot, and they tried to synthesize 58 target crystals. They claimed to synthesize 43 of them, but there was a review that came out from actually Robert Palgrave at UCL and Leslie Shoup at Princeton, saying none of the materials produced by A-Lab were new. The large majority were misclassified and a smaller number were correctly identified, but already no. So actually, not only are possibly these crystals not even real, a more important question to ask is, are any of these crystals even new? Well, actually, I'm not sure, because if you look at the database, there are loads of duplicates, and even just identical files. Like, how do you publish loads of files and not even check that some of them are identical? I'm going to call them CIFs. These are called crystallographic information files. That's the acronym. That was identical, so identical text. Even though the AI is supposed to change it and try to simulate new stuff, there are even more, thousands and thousands of near duplicates. So this means some of the atoms are just slightly shifted. Well, why is it likely that this happened? So that it created some things that aren't new, that are just very similar to what it was perhaps trained on. It's because it's really easy to do this. Okay, here's my algorithm. Take your unit cell, you change the basis vectors. You extend it, and you shift the motif atoms slightly. Now this one is a near duplicate of my original one, slightly shifted atoms, so a bit of noise. So I presented this algorithm in Italy last year, the European Crystallographic meeting, and they seemed to like it, so I wrote a program to be able to generate not just a few of these files, but let's generate 2.2 million. If AI can do it, sure, I can do it, fine. It's quite an easy program, written in Python, Dash for the app, and Jamie library, because you have to deal with reading and writing two files. On the left, you input the input file, and you change whatever you want to change. You can transform the basis, you can extend it, you can shift atoms slightly, you can decide whatever you want here. And now you get a completely different looking file. So crystallographers often will go into the file and say, these look the same or different. And these numbers will all look different, but actually, this is a near duplicate of the first one. So I've just generated a newly looking file. I'm going to call it a disguised crystal that looks completely different, but is actually basically the same. So it's real. It could have been just a bit of noise. Whereas there's no guarantee that what the AI generated was real. So am I winning? Perhaps I'm winning. Okay. I've got some examples of, here's the input, here's what I generated. Can you spot the difference? I mean, there are a lot of differences. Can you spot anything that's the same, perhaps?
Well, the 0.5s to the right are different. Like the 2.5s in the second and third row on the right, whereas on yours on the right, this is basically zero, right?
Yeah. So I've got, you can still sort of sense this is next to a 0.5.
Yeah.
Well, for some reason this one's 0. I'll give you a clue. They've got the same volume. So these are actually the exact same crystals, near duplicates. Here they are actually. On the left is my input, On the right, you can open the visualization software and you can look at it and you can see, oh yeah, fine, these look kind of the same. But looking at the file, you won't be able to guess that. Okay, what did I do specifically? I shifted the atoms up to 0.01 angstroms. Remember, angstroms is very small, about the width of a hydrogen atom. And then I changed the basis. It's no longer got these right angles, but I didn't extend it. You could extend it. I think in this case, this looks like a lot more. Yes, I doubled the length B. I kept the angles, and I shifted all the atoms randomly. Because I didn't change the angles, a crystallographer would look at this and say, but yeah, this is the format that we want. This is primitive, this is reduced. But there's actually a simple way to represent this. Okay, here's another one. Got a more interesting input crystal on the left. When you disguise it, you still get thrown around, and there's more added. And only once you visually add in more from the unit cells next to each other, then you sort of see, oh yes, this is the original crystal. Point being, I can generate so many of these, and they're all near duplicates of the original. I did a rough calculation. I could generate the 2.2 million that the AI generated in not that many hours, which is pretty good on a modest laptop. Okay, why can I do this? Basically, to summarize, two problems. One crystal can be generated by an infinite number of different files. And number two, it's really easy to generate millions of new looking files that are actually near duplicates. Okay, but how are we going to be able to tell? We want to be able to tell using maths whether they're different or not. To do this reliably, we need a metric that changes continuously under perturbations. So this is our second question. Our first question was, are crystals the same or are crystals different? Second question, if they are different, how much different are they? And for that, you can use a metric. This is a general definition, but a lot of the field currently, they're trying to find metrics that are useful to them. So ones that can be computed quickly. There are three main axioms: coincidence, symmetry, and the triangle inequality. So they're trying to find metrics that work with the crystals that they have and the computational power that they have. Okay, using this, you can actually map the crystals. Let me explain how. In our Earth diagram on the left, our invariant are latitude and longitudinal lines. So if 2 points have different latitude, different longitude, they're going to be 2 different points. That's our invariant. On the right, these are also, this is my invariant here, and this is a different invariant. But this is a projection, so we don't actually know how close the points are on the map. So here, this point's actually really close to this point, but we can't tell that alone from our projection. Same here. From our invariants, we're not going to be able to tell how close they are. We're just going to be able to, if you remember the definition, we're only going to be able to tell if they're the same or if they're different. So if it's a near duplicate, they're going to be different, but we want a metric on these invariants to tell us whether these two equivalence classes are going to be similar or not. Therefore, so these I've plotted invariants, this is a map of invariants, but you don't know if these, maybe there's one behind. Do you know the map of stars, if you're familiar with stars? You have a map of stars, and the ones next to each other, one could be really far away, and one could be really close, but we wouldn't know that from the projection, because this is a projection. Therefore, we introduce a metric later on these, and it's important that this is continuous to see how far away they are. Why is mapping really cool? Basically, you see these lines, these lines can tell you something about the space of all crystals. So each point is an equivalence class of all crystals that move around in space. They're the same crystal. So I'm just going to say that point's that crystal. I think, if I remember correctly, this line corresponds to all the, or maybe not even this line, just a line will correspond to a cubic crystal, but that's enlarged. So these, anything along this line or anything close to that line is going to be cubic. Using maps like these, crystallographers really want to look where the gaps are, look where there are lots of crystals already found, so they know where to look for new crystals. Yes, that's why using continuous invariance so exciting, because then you can maybe even plug this into an AI perhaps, because they were just using discrete symmetry groups, but if we use continuous invariance, hopefully we should get better results. Not something that I could copy in a Python program, because that's not great. Okay, let me summarize. So firstly, we went through the mathematical definitions. So what's a unit cell? What's a motif? These are the atoms in our unit cell. Periodic point sets, that's the set of all the points in our plane, or in our space, or in free space. Number 2, comparing crystals. We were able to say, are crystals the same? They're the same if they're in the same equivalence class. We can tell that if they are using a complete invariant. So just a function is going to be able to tell us if they're in the same equivalence class or not. And we want these invariants to be continuous. We don't want space groups. We don't want categories, because you can really easily jump. You break the symmetry, you jump from one category to the other. There are millions and millions of crystals in databases and only 230 space groups. So a lot of quite different crystals are actually in the same space group. So that's not particularly useful to us. And finally, we looked at some artificial illusions, demonstrated what happens when you don't use continuous invariance, and you get loads of duplicates, lots of near duplicates, and a bunch of rubbish, but they still get published in Nature and claim that they have progressed 800 years of knowledge? I don't know why I use that. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Sorry, it's a bit short. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
I forgot if you mentioned what's an invariant.
Invariant? One of the most difficult ones. An invariant is a function. An invariant is a function that has the same value if they are equivalent under isometry.
So what do you mean by continuous invariant?
A non-continuous invariant is this function is it's equal to space group 1 if they have this symmetry. They are in space group 2 if, so you assign specific values or something like that. And a continuous invariant, an example, it's the difficulty. If you have a function, you need to prove that it's continuous using the epsilon delta definition. And actually, the thing that we had on the homework on this week, question 4, analysis, where you had that's called Lipschitz continuity, and they use this often to prove that invariants are continuous. Okay, an example of a continuous invariant would be, okay, this is beyond the scope of this talk. I can try to explain. They basically look at nearest neighbors, and they add up all the distances, and somehow they have a function that takes into account k nearest neighbors, and that's an invariant, because a different crystal will have a different average or a different distances to its nearest neighbors, and that's continuous because it's distances and you're just adding an average to them, and then on that you can prove, you have to prove that it's a continuous invariant. But an invariant is a function. Yes. But complete invariants are more useful. Complete invariants let you identify whether they're different. So usually we want these. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any more questions?
Is the k-nearest like the k-nearest neighbor algorithm? Is that one?
Yeah, there's an algorithm.
Yeah. And then I had a question about the map when you were talking about the maps. I didn't quite understand when you meant like when you were trying to compare like the notion that like on like the left hand side we can't tell like the distance between like I don't know, North America and Asia on the furthest points. Is that like the same for the one on the right? Right.
Yes. So these are plotted invariants. There is no metric between them yet. Because they're already continuous, you can then form a metric on top of that to be able to say these 2 points are this much apart. So, for example, maybe these 2 points are, I think, usually you want to build metrics. It depends. Actually, I can't say that specifically. In general, these points could be very far apart, so a large perturbation, whereas these ones could be very close. So you need a metric to be able to say that. In most cases, I think in this diagram specifically, it's set up in a way, you choose the invariant so that these are pretty close. So when you have a metric, 2 points that are close on this diagram are close. Not fully sure because I don't have the equation for the metric or the invariant. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any more questions?
How do you calculate the mapping? So on the right side, how do you get to that?
So on the right side, this is the nearest neighbors that I was sort of talking about.
What the colours mean?
The colours, I think that's how many crystals you have. So if it's more red, you're going to have more crystals concentrated around here. These are kind of red because when experimentalists look at crystals and they put them into the database, they're going to find more of these. Maybe students are looking, I don't know. They're going to find more of these. So the ones that are in specific groups or have a nice symmetry, you're going to see more of. So that's why they're more red on this diagram, because there are more of them along that line.
Is there a way, like generally given like the CIF of a crystal to like not having to like make the crystal in your life to tell if it's going to be like useful in the industry, like?
Okay, that's a good question. So that's what they're trying to do. So they're trying to generate a SIF and realize and say, is this stable? Is this going to be a useful material? That's all holistic. So you don't actually know. What they do is, you remember the picture I showed at the very start with the bonds? What they usually try and do is they try and calculate the bonds between them and say, is the energy of this crystal going to be high, low, is it going to be stable? You kind of want to minimize the energy. Unfortunately, the problem with this is that every single research group uses a different energy function. So there's no like universal energy, and it will depend on the elements, it will depend on how far there are lots of variables. So what mathematical crystallographers are trying to do now, and you saw the references 2024, 2025, is that they've been stuck for about a century, more than a century, just looking at energy. Let's look at a crystal geometrically. Let's look at the distances between them only and not even consider energy. So yes, that's what people try to do. They try to look at energy and say, this is going to be useful in industry, this one's going to be stable, but it's not too useful because it's probably not right. So yes, so sometimes you can look, if you need something specific, say I need a cubic crystal that does this, you can use geometry to say they're going to lie somewhere along these lines, so you need this sort of structure.
Is there a reason why energy matters? Like, is it for like electricity or something?
Energy matters, I think, in terms of stability, because often your materials are gonna fall apart.
Oh, so like if it's like it'll explode or something.
You sure? I don't know the exact terminology since I'm a mathematician, but if someone else knows better, I think yes, they fall apart, or they don't work. They don't do what you want them to do. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Sorry, I just want to get a clear image in my mind. So the metric that has a continuous way to describe how similar different crystals are to each other.
Yes.
But in terms of what we're trying to get the metric to do, in similarity, are we just meaning like if we've shifted the crystal, like each of them by a distance? Like
Yes.
Is that what primarily we're
Yes, it
worried
is a
about?
distance. So it's up to. I think I know of a metric that they use. It's angstroms. Everything's in angstroms.
Okay,
Yes,
yeah.
it's in angstroms. Yeah. Metric and the invariant, they're both in angstroms. Yeah.
And
They're
then
both distances.
if you have the metric,
Yes.
like when would you have a point at which you determine that they are different, or you just keep it because obviously it's measuring how similar they are,
Mm-hmm.
but would there be a point where you're like, okay, these are definitely different, or like
We say most are different. Unless they coincide perfectly, they're different. They could be near duplicates. So we say you brought up a good point. In the past, they've had a threshold and said if they are shifted by this much, then we say fine, it's a bit of noise, they're the same. However, you can imagine if you do one shift and then another shift, you can shift until they're completely different. That's why we don't say they're different or not different, that's true or false. Instead, we use the metric to say it's different by 0.00 angstroms.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Like that. Mm-hmm. Any more? Okay. I think if that's it, I'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for coming. This is greater turnout than I expected. Next week, we're going to have a talk from Brian on category theory, introduction to category theory. I'll be putting out posters and look forward to seeing you there. Next week, there'll be biscuits, free biscuits.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.